Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm joined by Greg Cass, aka EyeOnCanon, to discuss episode 7 from the Acolyte titled Choice. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it's time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, everybody, welcome back to Forest Coast Conversations, and I am so thrilled to get into this episode with Greg Cass, first-time guest on the podcast, and, just a wonderful conversation is about to come your way. In fact, it is the longest episode in Forest Coast Conversations history, so we go really, really in-depth into the episode choice, episode 7 from the Acolyte. It deserves it, frankly. It deserves all of the conversation surrounding it because there's a lot of philosophical conversation and deep thematical debate that arises because of this episode and the nature of the content within it. That I think is really important to both the community and just the nature and the canon of Star Wars itself, but also for the real world, which I think is the most important thing that we can take away from these fun space opera fantasy adventures. So, of course, that'll be on the other side of this little segment here called Cloud City Gossip, where we run through the news that has taken place in the Star Wars and Lucasfilm adjacent galaxy over the last week. And frankly, the only news that I was able to look at or see in the past week here was the fact that the full panel schedule for the D23 Expo convention that will be taking place in August was released. And of course, now that Star Wars is a part of the Disney family, I figured that there would be a good presence there for D23, at least for Star Wars at D23, when that convention does take place. There'll be a couple panels at the convention, not necessarily panels, I should say, but there's going to be a full. Somehow, I think they're trying to bring over the ILM stagecraft, the volume, if you will, to the convention center, or at least some walkthrough experience about it. Doug Chang's supposed to be there, and you know what? I'm going to be there. I will be boots on the ground at D23 for all 3 days of the convention, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, from August 9th, 10th, and 11th, I believe, are the dates. And you can rest assured Doug Chang's going to be there. I mean, frankly, I was going to check out the stagecraft to begin with, but if my boy Doug Chang is there, I'm going to do everything I can to absolutely try and get a selfie with that man because I really do appreciate and love his work. And if I can, I'll try and pry away some tidbits about the Obi-Wan Kenobi concept art that he did, because if you saw that panel at Celebration London last year, it was just truly some spectacular stuff that he was able to showcase from both that and season 3 or season 2, season 3 at that point of The Mandalorian, which we still haven't seen a collected book on the Obi-Wan Kenobi stuff, but if there was such a thing, I would certainly buy it. So Lucasfilm, be on the lookout for that. So that's going to be an all-day thing for days, for the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. In addition to that, I saw that Daniel Logan, who played young Boba Fett, of course, in Attack of the Clones and voices younger Boba Fett in the Clone Wars, is going to be there for signing and just to say hello, meet and greet kind of thing. Ashley Eckstein as well, voice of Ahsoka, will also be on site. So those are some of just the Star Wars offerings at the convention for the main panels, of course. And then after that, there will be, I imagine, probably some Star Wars presence at the Parks panel on Saturday night, probably maybe a trailer for Skeleton Crew on the Friday, I have to imagine. And of course, finally, at the Legends ceremony, are not our pals, but theoretically our pals. If I were to be friends with them, I think I would be. John Williams and Harrison Ford and Frank Oz are going to be receiving Legends, or will be canonized as Disney Legends at that ceremony. So that's also a wonderful thing. And can't wait to give you guys some content from D23, as very excited to see that show for the first time and just kind of experience that and all of its fun formats there. of course, we'll be having a special D23 preview episode out in the coming weeks there. So on August 4th, you can be expecting that one in your podcast feed. So it's just a little precursor for that in the near future here. So with that, folks, let's get to our conversation about the Acolyte here. You're not going to want to miss out on this one, so stay tuned. On the other side of this break, it'll be right there for you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Forest Ghost Conversations. We have finally got the antithesis to episode 3 of the Acolyte, which was Destiny. We now have episode 7 in our midst, and this episode is called Choice. And it provides a lot of choices and a lot of questions. And we're here to talk about it. There's a lot to. We thought last week's episode was sexy and juicy, and now this week's episode was just a philosophical mind explosion of an episode. And of course, we have to have someone here to chat about it. So we have a first-time guest on the podcast. He is the co-host of the Long Take Review through the Glass Collins podcast, 2 separate podcasts there, folks. And he's also the co-host on the Breakfast Pack, which you can find on the Rebel Base Card podcast. You may know him from Instagram and various other sites as EyeOnCanon. We have Greg Cass. Welcome to the show, Greg. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm so great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the program. I told you when you guested on ours, I am in awe of all the Indiana Jones episodes you did. I think Flying Solo, and not to cross franchises there, but you had some around that time that were like 2 hours long, and I deeply respect you for being able to do that solo. So it was great.
Thank you for listening, first off. And my back, when I used to record those, when I was sitting on the floor crisscross applesauce, hates me for doing those. And Greg, your name has been on my whiteboard, my mastery whiteboard here for a long time to get on the show. And for some reason, I don't know if it was fate or choice that destiny or choice that brought us to this point. But I think it was the perfect episode to have you on for your insights and just to break down this episode. And I've got a list of doozy questions here, so I'm hoping that we have a wonderful time. And for listeners, I bet you're ready to hear them all here. But we've got Greg, every person that's been on this show so far, I've asked them the same question to start here, so I'm gonna throw the same question to you here as well. And it's about the whole concept of the High Republic era itself, right? I want to know your experience with it. As you call yourself EyeOnCanon, so I imagine that you've been keeping up pretty much with this. So have you been keeping up with the books? To what extent have you been keeping up with the books? I know you have some Padawans yourself, so maybe you've watched an episode or two of the Young Jedi Adventure. So what experience have you had with the High Republic era before the Acolyte started?
Well, I was really hoping that I could brag that I was the deepest High Republic fan you've had on, but it sounded like you've had Jimmy really gives me a run for my money.
He really
back
has, yeah.
in the second episode here. So I can't brag about that. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say maybe I'm the longest High Republic fan, the longest term, and that is because I had the good fortune. My wife worked for a bookstore, and in October of 2019, the October before they started coming out in January, I got early review copies of A Test of Courage and Into the Dark. So I have been a fan from that moment forward. I am not one of those cool Instagrammers who gets sent the review copies, but my wife was important enough that she got sent them, and the bookstore passed them to me and said, "Hey, nerd, is this something we should be interested in?" And I cried and leapt for joy that I had them. And so from that moment on, I've read literally everything down to today's issue of High Republic Adventures. I finished about 10 minutes before I came down to the basement to record. So it's one of my favorite parts of the Disney era, to be sure, maybe all eras. I very much enjoyed you singing the praises of Eye of Darkness, because I do also think that's a fantastic novel. Temptation of the Force, which will stay very vague because I know people may not have had the time to read yet. I will say it came close, but it fell just shy of overtaking Eye of Darkness for me. But I'm really enjoying this phase 3 and how it's kind of making you feel like you spent your time well keeping up with everything along the way.
Oh, wow. First off, I love that you finally got your access that you needed in order to get that. How did you keep it to yourself? Like, and not spoiling anybody, just being like, I know something you don't. I think this is awesome. But also at the same time, how was it that you didn't know Light of the Jedi yet? So, like, you had the ancillary stories surrounding it, but you didn't have like the main context of like the hyperspace disaster yet.
Yes, and you can believe I was sending endless, texts or Instagram DMs to Random House being like, "Hey, I got previews of these 2. I'd love to see the
Yeah, I,
3rd."
I need to finish the
Um,
story.
yeah, and because as much as I'm very excited about and proud and bragging about it, it was a bad way to read those, books, and, I started with Into the Dark and, A Test of Courage, which, is relevant to the Acolyte because that is the debut of
Hmm.
Vernestra. It's very much a standalone story. They reference the Great Disaster. I think it takes place just after Light of the Jedi, if my
Yeah.
memory serves me. And so I could tell something cool had happened, but really didn't get it, whatever it was. Um, uh, and then Into the Dark was, a little trickier in that same regard. But it was funny because when you get a review copy, not everybody plays by the rules. I played by the rules, and that means you aren't allowed to speak about kind of,
Hmm.
the contents of them, of course. And for a lot of times, you're not even supposed to say like positive or negative
Yeah, you
reviews.
can't even
Yeah,
suggest anything.
and, it's a little different because I don't think publicly anybody could link me up with my source for the books. So, but, I think some of these Instagram influencers who get them, they would really get like removed
Mhm.
from the list. So I just figured the safe thing to say was that people need to read this book and people should pre-order it because I don't think any publisher would get mad at you
Yeah,
saying
spend
that.
your
So I
money.
just kept saying, yeah, exactly. Get that pre-order and get that pre-order. And so and then I just kept it to myself, which I knew about something like say the light whip, and I'm like, wait till people see this,
Mhm.
it'll be crazy. But the my experience since then, and I think you are a part of this as well, the community surrounding the High Republic is unbelievably positive and
Yeah.
wonderful. And, I think some people have liked or not liked different entries. I think phase 2 was a struggle for a lot of people to kind of go back in time and lose some of those characters they loved for a
Yeah,
little
sure.
while. But I have found it to be like this subset of Star Wars fans where you're not getting the hate and the bigotry that we're seeing, say, in
Mhm.
response to the Acolyte at times.
Right.
And it's this nice little crew of kind of bookish people, and it's been a really positive influence on especially my social media
Mhm.
feeds to have more and more of those accounts. So it's a great and if people are listening because they have been watching the Acolyte and want to get into it, absolutely. And you can easily commit to just some small set of the books. I think just reading the adult novels is totally worthwhile and works. And then seeking out different characters or locations works as well. I think if you are daunted by how big it is, just read some little piece of it.
Yep, yep, find your place in it. It's a
Yeah.
big galaxy, and you can find your way through it some way or another. Now, I don't wanna presume, but if you're a fan of Vernestra as well, you might be the longest fan of Vernestra as well, not just the longest fan of the High Republic, but, like, imagine talking to yourself in the past here, right? If you can tell your October, 2019 Greg that, like, this character in this, middle grade reader book is gonna be a featured star in a later Disney Plus series, which is getting, tons of views on Disney Plus. You're like, what? What are we? Or 2020? Yeah, not even 2019, but yeah. Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just trying to do the math in my head to figure it out. I guess it launched in 2021 because we
Yep.
were deep in the pandemic by
That
then.
January.
So,
Yep.
so yeah. Yep. So it was fall 2020. I had the books just a few months early. Yeah, I mean, I will defer to the creator. I think Justina Ireland is by far the
That's true.
biggest and first, but
Aside from her.
I yeah, it's just her and then maybe Michael C. Glain, the editor,
Hmm.
and then me. No, but I think she's a really great character. It's incredible to think that she made the leap, and we have obviously Grand Admiral Thrawn, but not many characters make that leap from books to kind of meaningful
Yeah.
character, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
get the cameo here and there. And I wouldn't have believed you if you told me that back then. And it's
Mhm.
not anything about the quality of the character or the writing. It just would seem so improbable. I actually also probably wouldn't have imagined Murielans lived that long, because I don't think that was canon at that point. Or, I already failed on the Ki-Adi-Mundi lifespan, so I don't know if I can pass on this one as well. Um, but it's pretty incredible, and I think part of what helps abide my love of the High Republic is the creators are so excited and
Mhm.
enthusiastic about it, and the fact that their small little creation became something like the Acolyte is incredible to them, just as it's incredible to us.
Agreed. Agreed. And the last thing I'll just query about with your early access is how wild must it have been to have been like, I thought the Nile was the bad guys in this, but now that there's this like Dranger, these like wild bushes of leaves and plants, like what's the deal with this?
Yeah. Well, and I definitely expected the Drengir to be the main focus in some of those other books that
Hmm.
came out, and again, to stay broad, they were mainly relegated to the comics, although they've popped up a couple times more recently in books. But it was funny that it's like, oh wait, uh I guess these are both involved, or yeah, that there's a double there. It was kind of funny. And I will say, the basically once the High Republic became very successful, I stopped getting those books because they were no longer concerned about
Yeah.
kind of selling bookstores on them. But I think I got wave 2 a little bit early, and then that kind of dried up. And then my wife has now changed jobs, much to my disappointment.
You're like, what
I
are
was
you
like, no,
doing?
you can't.
Back
Like,
there.
we got to get Star Wars books. Like, what are you talking about? But she's very happy with her employment. So I really can't complain. But I still rush out day and date whenever there's a new one dropping, and grab it at my local bookstore. So I will stay through till the end, which is not that much further, really. I mean,
No.
less than a year at this point. So
Oh, it's rough. It's rough. And it feels like just yesterday, but the pandemic really took away a lot of the
true.
time up. I feel like it was like, oh, didn't Light of the Jedi just come out? And then, the spoiled part of us where I'm like, man, I feel like there's a new one coming out every 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
it was hard to, when I was in grad school, especially, I'm like, I'm not reading for fun on the side. I have so much to do already
Mm.
here. It's so hard to read for pleasure. And then, of course, during the breaks in summertime, I would just quickly binge the rest of them. And
Yeah.
now that I'm just caught up and I'm at a point where it's like, okay, a new one comes out, I ingest it. Now we're at the end. Like, oh my gosh, it's wild.
uh,
Well,
I do want to put in a plug. You mentioned on a previous episode that you didn't buy the really young kids books. There's 2 of them, I
yeah.
believe. Those do have stickers in them, my friend, and
Oh,
they're worth getting just for the stickers.
you know what?
So
You're
you
selling me
might
on
want to
it.
shell your $5 to get like a Vector sticker or a Buryaga sticker. Like,
Ooh.
yeah, totally worth it.
Now I'll tell you, I not only the stickers there, but you're selling me on for that. But you never know what fun little
Yeah.
details within there that could really sell the character. I mean, I can't remember the exact book it was in phase one. Of course, full spoilers now, everybody, for the High Republic books. But I'm gonna say the event because I don't know which book it takes place in, so no one can get mad at me for this one. You'll just discover it when you get to that point yourself. But when Mari Santeca dies in like one of the young
Mm.
adult books, that was literally I read it on a plane and I landed and I told my wife, it's like, this is why these books are important. This doesn't happen in the other one. You have to read the young adult ones, also you won't know what's happening here. Good stuff.
Yeah, agreed. In Temptation of the Force, I felt that I hadn't read the newest YA title well enough. I'm like, I'm confusing
Mm,
these characters. Like, again, I think you can pass if you haven't read every bit, but I was like, I got to go back and read that first YA of Phase 3 again, in order to get all those different names straight.
that's right. That's right. There's always, and the fun part is we can always go back and reread it again just in case.
They're there.
Great, great stuff. Well, we now have your foundation for the High Republic, and it's time to get into the Acolyte. So, full spoilers to anybody if you haven't seen Choice yet, Episode 7 from the Acolyte. go pause this episode now and watch it and come right back to this moment, because I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions and thoughts and think pieces to galore at this point. But welcome back to the show if you if you just paused us. And let's get into this conversation here, Greg. So my first question is about the perspective that this episode finally gives us, which is the other side, or let me just say not the other side per se, but an alternate perspective per
Mm.
se. And from a storytelling viewpoint, are you glad that we had the first introduction in episode 3 and then had to wait a few episodes for this version in episode 7, or would you have rather them be back to back?
It's really interesting now that we think we can see the full arc, because I think we're just assuming so far that next week is just the conclusion of the present day, whatever that means.
That's true.
But to kind of see how they chose to structure it is really unusual and surprising in a lot of ways. And my personal kind of philosophy is trust the creatives, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they have a reason for doing things the way they're doing them. I think, you've been advocating for a healthy, like, let the story finish before you freak out,
Yeah.
see all of it before
Yeah.
you judge it too much. And so, it was a bold storytelling choice. It ends up in good Star Wars fashion, just confusing everybody a little, right? And
Mhm.
4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. That's how we count. So the fact that we started in the present and flashback, there's a lot of good conventions in particularly epic literature.
Mhm.
The phrase in literature is called en medias res, and that just reminds us that, like, storytelling doesn't have to happen in a linear fashion, and it
Yeah.
can be surprising. Now, your question suggests, like, particularly splitting up of these two flashbacks, and I was teasing you before the mics were turned on that, like, you've been wanting this episode since number 4,
Yep.
and it really was a surprise. Part of my brain has been wanting it to be symmetrical,
Mhm.
that you would go like the two, well, and I concentrate on the titles, right? Lost, Found,
Yeah.
Justice, Revenge, and then we got Destiny, Day, Night, and then I really wanted it to, for symmetry reasons, to be Choice, what we now know as Choice, as number 6, and then proceed
Mm.
on. But they didn't even do that. So it's funny how like that really deeply bothers me, and yet is not important at all.
It doesn't.
They're telling the story the way that, they want to tell it, and that's great. And so I will say it was surprising, but as I look at the whole arc, I think it was a good choice, and this to me felt fulfilling enough that
Mhm.
the longer wait didn't bother me. And I will throw the question back to you by asking my own question. Sorry, that's what happens when you get
I love it.
podcasters on.
Let's do it.
Which is when we think about the modern TV landscape, it's
Mhm.
often like, are you a binger or do you like the weekly release schedule?
Yeah.
And so your question and kind of all the frustration or joy around this is so particular to this moment, right? Because in the future, none of this will bother people. They'll
Mhm.
watch it all in a weekend,
Sure.
or rewatch it. So, so I'm curious, like, are you a binger or a weekly drop viewer, and how do you think it affects the Acolyte that in this moment we're all weekly viewers?
Yeah, yeah. So generally, I would say I am perhaps a weekly. I do like to take a space in between episodes, whether it be a week, 2 weeks, sometimes, even for shows that exist, like the full season is out there. I don't typically just watch a whole season in a sitting.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe I'll watch like enough for like a movie length, because that's usually about my ability to sit there and ingest something, and then I usually like to let it breathe and sit, and then I can speculate on it and think about things and just ingest what I saw and think about the future, the past, and all that stuff, and just how it affects me here. So I do love the week to week format. It's interesting that when Disney Plus was announced in 2019, right before the world went very virtual, I think that was their intent, was to create those water cooler conversations, a la like an HBO has really set up and all that stuff. And maybe if it had launched in like 2021, perhaps maybe they wouldn't have done that similar model. Maybe would have done a bit more of the Netflix type of thing. Um, Again, it's well, I will caveat that with sometimes it depends on what the show is, because I love that they did this with the space in between and the break in between there for the story. First, both the storytelling means that you said, but also every week I loved like I loved and hated, but it was ultimately a love at the end of the day where I was like, oh, I have to wait another week for this. Like it's that
Mm,
feeling of like this was so good, I've been enjoying it so much. How dare they make me wait for this? And that good burn you feel as a fan when you're loving something and
yeah.
you want that next thing right away. And then maybe that anticipation makes the week go by a bit faster in a way. Um, Now, I will say those later episodes of the Bad Batch season 3, right, where it was like, all right, let's get it going here, guys. That was a different kind of feel there,
Yeah.
where the you're not ready for this, and I was like, okay, I feel like I'm pretty ready. Um, so that's kind of where I generally I like the week to week format, and I like that we've been able the community that we've fostered between ourselves and generally the people that we share our close conversations with online, both in the Star Wars community and otherwise, are enjoying the show to a fair degree as well and having good, meaningful discussions about it, even if they don't like everything about the
Mm,
show. They're able to present it in ways that are like from a place of love and compassion and empathy about the show rather than the hateful negativity that people have been spewing. So I've been very good about keeping that aside in a box over there and just like enjoying this sandbox that I've had with my friends, uh, talking about the goodness of the show. But generally, that's kind of where I land there based off of your counter question.
I think that's where I go too, and to me that is the beauty of the experience, and I think a show like The Acolyte, where so much is kind of wrapped up in a singular mystery or a set of questions, like I think the the answer will determine whether the show is ultimately a success or not. But I always try to balance that with what you're saying, the conversations I got to have along the way.
Hmm.
And I think, I have in my TV viewing had positive and negative experiences. Lost, Game of Thrones, right? Like all those that
Yeah.
kind of had these moments. And yet every time what I remember far after the fact, I don't remember beat for beat what happened in the Lost finale, but I remember the friends I talked to about it
Hmm.
at lunch. I remember, the theories I had, some of which were right, some were wrong, and so on. And I do think that that is healthy and makes the show feel like more of an event. For
Yes.
me personally, binge shows just feel too disposable.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think Stranger Things is probably a very high quality show, but I can never really have a good experience with it because I have one
Hmm.
friend who binges it all the day it drops and is like, "Oh, you guys aren't going to believe the finale," and I'm like, It's like 6 hours. How'd you do that? Were you on double speed?" But like and then my other friend will take 3-4 weeks to get through it, and so it's like, well, you do that weird conversation we're all used to, like, well, which ones have you seen, and
Hmm.
what one is that, and what has happened. And so I do think the communal aspect of something like these Acolyte episodes, I will share your sentiments on the end of Bad Batch, which maybe didn't need to be spread out like that, but these Acolyte episodes have been a real treat in that regard.
Yeah, I will second everything you just said there, and I will also say, like, for all the good and bad that people have been chatting about the Acolyte, I will say I just love talking about. I love the conversations surrounding the Acolyte. The good about the show itself, like healthy, meaningful
Yeah.
conversations about the show, and not just like should women have lightsabers, but like I love the conversation surrounding the Acolyte for like the deep intellectual thought processes that it brings up about the Jedi, about what is right, what is wrong, the things that really matter about a fun
Mm,
space opera that we can take into our everyday lives that really impact the world.
yeah. Well said. Agreed.
Well said, I will say I'm sorry, Greg. I don't. Maybe I should apologize. I don't know, but I got my next question here, and it's perhaps the most ambitious question I've ever asked on this podcast so far. So, like,
And right
again,
after you promised a deep intellectual conversation. So you really dug me a hole. Let's see how I do.
I did. I hope I deliver with this question here. Like, when I was typing it up this morning, I thought, oh, this is either gonna be really great or really bad. I don't know. We'll find out. But hopefully, it's leaning towards the good side here. So, like I mentioned before we even hit play on recording this, I thought this was one of the most philosophical of any Star Wars property I've ever. This episode in particular is probably the most philosophical of any Star Wars property I've come across. And the events on Brendok, were they the result of choices, or was it always destined to happen?
Ooh,
I told you.
take sigh, take another drink. Yeah, I mean, I think this question is the heart of what modern Star Wars is trying to figure out, right?
Yeah.
In old time Star Wars, and just to put my cards on the table, people not familiar with me, I'm what I call a child of the dark times. So I was actually born in 1983. So I came up on Star Wars on home video and
Yeah.
books, and the prequels coming around felt like this unbelievable gift. It's kind of a funny micro Star Wars generation, because I respect the prequel kids, but I'm like, I don't quite fit in with them all the time. Um, so I think this larger question is what something like Star Wars aspires to when we think of it as a myth.
Mhm.
That myths are supposed to, in some way, move beyond kind of the everyday concerns of a society and a culture and tackle really big questions, right? And you think of something like the Bible or ancient Greek mythology, and it's like, hey, guess what? Being human is terrible. Let's
Yeah.
try to explore like why and how we do that a little better. And so, here we are in the modern day, and hey, being human is great, but also kind of terrible. And
Mhm.
let's kind of unpack some of those questions. And so, the core of human experience has always been chasing the question you just asked, not about the Acolyte. I mean, we
Yeah,
won't give
sure.
Leslie Headland that much credit, but we've been always chasing that question of like, are we doing something on a destined path, or is this all just chance, just
Mhm.
random happenstance, or perhaps choice, right? Free will, predestination. This is at the core of all religions essentially. So I the way the Star Wars mythology works is you get this kind of free card of the Force works in mysterious ways, and
Mhm.
everything can be the set of, you know, yes, characters made choices, but they align with it. A very common mythological trope is the character. This goes back to Oedipus, I think. The character trying to avoid their fate and accidentally causing their fate directly,
Mhm.
right? When they do that. All right. So that was all just preamble because I was stalling for thoughts. So to get to the actual question, I think the events on Brendok, I think they are the results of choices. And
Okay.
I think the reason why those events happen the way they did is because characters made specific choices. And
Mhm.
um, you said this is dropping Sunday, so I can say this. One of the
You
questions I'm
can.
going to throw to Greg when we record later this week is kind of when we think about this as the title being choice, is it one choice? Is it choice in general,
Mm.
like all
Mm.
choice, as opposed to like destiny broadly? And so I see this episode saying that the events that we have witnessed in this show so far are the result of specific choices that the characters made. And
Mm.
I think of Soul and Torbin jumping on those speeder bikes as a moment.
Mhm.
I think Soul choosing which twin he wanted to save, which is uh, a brutal moment, but a choice, a moment of choice.
Mm.
And I also think of the choice Osha made and the choice that Mother Anastasia made. Shout out to a really good Star Wars mom. And there aren't a lot of
Yeah.
really good Star Wars moms. They get left out of the story too often. And here we have a character that was willing to sacrifice kind of what she wanted most in this world to be a mother. She was going to sacrifice her leadership to be a good mother and to let her
Mhm.
daughter do what she wanted to do. And that choice mattered. And the fact that
Mm.
she revealed that choice to Soul as she died changed Soul, right? And like
Mhm.
I think all of those choices matter. And so, not to get into like the full existential, what does this mean in real life? I will say, within this work of art, I think we are meant to interpret that these choices are what shaped these events, and that we're going to have to deal with the ramifications of those choices. Each of those characters will.
Yeah, yeah. I like everything that you said there. And again, for a question you had no idea was coming. Bravo. Bravo. Very well said. I as soon as this frankly, while I was watching this episode, I was transported back to a classroom that I had in college where it was my senior. It had nothing to do with the class I was taking. It was must have been another class that was like either before or after. But you know how like sometimes they leave stuff up from other, like the class that was before. No one they forgot to wipe down the board, or they put up a post-it note on the wall that no one took down or anything like that, or cleaning staff didn't take care of it at all. But there were at the end of both walls, there was one that said, I am in charge of my own choices and my destiny. And then it was at the other end was, other people decide, like other people's choices make my own destiny. And ironically, I sat in the middle of the table in between both of those things, and I thought, boy, isn't this a metaphor for life in general? So I'm like, is this what this episode is telling me? I don't know. Is there somewhere in the middle? And then of course my brain is thinking through all of Star Wars, right? Yoda says, always in motion the future is, right? Like the future is not set. I'm like, okay, that makes a ton of sense here in this case. And then Vader's always like, it is your destiny. And of course, he's the chosen one, and a prophecy that he's going to fulfill. So that's already set in stone that he's going to do that. Just they didn't know how. Prophecy misread. It could have been. They didn't think that the Empire would have to come in order for him to bring balance to the Force. But such is the case. So again, this episode brings up a lot of the questions of, was it meant to happen? Are these characters? There's a lot of just interesting things of like Soul just automatically connecting to this person for obvious, seemingly no reason, and then just like the Force just is exploding on this planet. There's a lot going on here, and then a lot of choices are made along the way, and things happen. And to your adage of mythology and philosophy in this matter is like there are the cases of is everything predestined to happen, and then I have free will, everything happens at my own ability and accordance with. And then I'm reminded of this story I read in college. His name is Boethius. I think I'm pronouncing his name right, where he's in jail and about to die, and he's like, free will only works until I achieve the ultimate goal set out in front of me. So he's in the middle there. And I'm like, boy, is this just me again sitting in the middle of that classroom in between these two posters? I don't know. And this is the question that is really, at least for me, came at the forefront when I was just embracing this episode for what it was and for what was presented on screen here. And another question that kind of comes to mind here as we're having this discussion is, I know episode 6 ended with Soul being like, you're going to sit here and you're going to listen to me and you're going to like it. But is this really Soul telling her, like, are we supposed to presume that this is Soul saying to May, this is what happened? Or is this actually what happened, and maybe perhaps what he tells her is a different thing? I don't know. I mean, it's not like it starts off with him being like, okay, 16 years ago, we're back on Brendok, and me and these 3 other Jedi were there doing this, right? You don't get that narrator sense on this. So they even brings that question to the fold, is who is the reliable narrator here? Is there a reliable narrator? Because clearly everybody can see this event from different sides, and based off of when you appeared in the room, you might get a different viewpoint on the whole situation.
Well, I have to just respond to your anecdote by saying I am a faculty member at a university, and I sit in a lot of rooms about like making meaningful learning experiences. And you're just exemplified, like that's the beauty of college, is that it's not what I can put on a syllabus and construct for one class. It's like the happenstance that happens when you get to be in a world of ideas. And I'm obviously a deep believer in higher education, even though it's kind of under assault, and I'm still paying student loans that make me regret some of my choices. But it is so important that society gives people a space to explore those ideas, even if you're just sitting alone in a classroom. You didn't say alone, but I picture you alone, just kind of
Oh,
looking to your
I
left
was
and
there
to your right.
first. So yeah, I was alone. I was that student that got to class 20 minutes beforehand and made sure I was all set up and ready to go because my parents were like, if you're on time, you're late. So
Yeah. Oh, I could use more of you in my classrooms.
yes, yes.
Again, Greg will be getting a very similar question when we record, because I thought about this a lot too, because we got two, traditionally we'd call them frame narratives, right? A frame narrative is where, Bilbo Baggins sits down and starts writing in his book, and then you
Mm-hmm.
go to the events of Lord of the Rings. And so, uh, we got two frames. We have Osha putting on the helmet, and we have Sol, as you said, recounting this to May, like, let me tell you what's going to happen. And the way Rashomon is one of those movies I talk about all the time as if I've seen it. I've never actually seen it, but the way Rashomon as style works of art tend to happen is that you get multiple perspectives, and then sometimes you get the one that is the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
Ridley Scott had a movie a few years ago called The Last Duel that essentially did that.
Yes.
It was a he said she said story, and so we got
And then
one
the
man's
truth.
perspective and then the other, and then the truth, right? So the art put their finger on the scale. And The Last Jedi obviously comes to mind as well, because we got the
Mm-hmm.
two versions of Kylo and Luke's confrontation. And I think it's hard to not get that third one where you get and then the truth of
Mm-hmm.
what happened. I think the way that the flashback is shot in this episode, I lean towards Saul's point of view, not objective truth.
Mm-hmm.
I think the frame where he's talking to May seems more relevant than Osha putting on the helmet. It seems
Yeah.
like Osha putting on the helmet and communing with the Force would kind of bring up her own memories of it, her own understanding. I don't think she would have. I don't know how the Force works. That's not how the Force works. But it doesn't seem that you would have access to the perspectives of long dead people far away just by
Mm-hmm.
putting on a helmet.
Mm.
So so many of the early scenes of the episode are Soul peeking around a rock, right?
Yeah.
And the camera is usually with him or over his shoulder, kind of insisting that it's his perspective. So the way I see but then Torbin breaks that, right? So
Yeah.
like, as much as it works, we then go into Torbin's head, it would seem. And
It's true.
so is it just like, but then we know this isn't what they reported to the council, so it's not like we're reading the Jedi report or something like
Yeah,
that.
right.
It seems that it's either accidentally or purposefully breaking away from just one perspective within that. And there are a few moments, not many, but there are a few moments where you're with May or Osha, but not with the Jedi within this. So what I thought worked really well about it, dodging your question just a little bit, is that like there's not a lot that contradicts between the two episodes.
Mm-hmm.
There are kind of events we see different sides of, or we get a little bit before or a little bit after, or we
Sure.
get what's happening in the next room. But I think often in the Rashomon model, again, a film I haven't seen, but I'll pretend, you get like the same exact events but with different interpretations. So like the
Mm-hmm.
actors would change their tone of voice or their body language to get that feeling of what is objective truth if we witness events really differently. So I think we can't quite say this is meant to be that kind of, this is what really happened, quote unquote. I think this is just the other side of it. And um, I'll just say that makes it really compelling, because
Yeah.
it's hard to pinpoint any bad choices the Jedi make. There were
Yeah.
overreactions and there were missteps, but they present these events in such a way that you're like, they were trying to do the best they can. Or am I just bending over backwards to redeem the Jedi?
No,
You
no,
give me your views.
I think you're on the right point here. I'm going to put a pin in that one because we may have a question about that later
Mm.
on in our discussion here. So you're on the right pathway thinking through on at least we're on the same wavelength there a little bit there with the way at least everything is presented here. So keep that in mind.
Okay.
Also, I don't think anyone, like a lot of these Kurosawa films, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, right? Who among us has seen all of these?
Yeah, I shouldn't cop to it. I should just pretend. I don't know. My university library gives me a streaming service called Canopy, which I
Okay.
think a lot of public libraries give out, and they're all there, and they're all in my list of like watch these sometime.
Yep, get to
I'll get them,
it.
but it's like it's hard to sit down in a night and be like, I know the old Japanese film with subtitles. That's the
Yes,
one
the
I
three
want to
and a
watch
half
tonight.
hour one.
Yeah.
Let me do this deep dive on this Sunday afternoon here with
Oh.
my copious free time. Ugh.
Yeah.
At any rate, let's get dive into the episode itself now, and we learn why the Jedi are actually here on Brendok. They're here to investigate this vergence in the Force,
Mm.
an explosion of life and Force activity, which is the result of the hyperspace disaster some 100 years ago. So, Greg, as a person that is
Hey!
a big person on canon, you've proclaimed yourself as a High Republic book fan, and full spoilers again for the High Republic stories here. But for the listeners at home, what is this event that they are referring to here?
How exciting. And, I think your show and many others have kind of always celebrated this as the end of the High Republic era. And it is, but there haven't been that many connections, really just
Hmm.
for Nestra overall. So
Yeah.
it was really, really exciting to get a shout out. So and I also appreciate you throwing me a softball question. This is
I
a
am.
did you do the
Yes.
reading question, not a do the critical thinking question.
Well, this is
So
an easier one after that last one I just threw at you.
so the assigned reading suggests that no when the what happened is I'll go with the basic level. What happens at the opening of Light of the Jedi, the very first book of the High Republic series, the adult novel, is there is a freighter and transport called the Legacy Run that is traveling through hyperspace, and as they are traveling through hyperspace, the captain sees a different ship ahead of them,
Hmm.
which is shocking because that should not happen and should not be possible and breaks all the known physics of hyperspace, according to this captain. He tries to steer the ship to dodge the obstacle and is almost successful, but ends up hitting it. And then the Legacy Run breaks apart and flies out of hyperspace across, I don't know, dozens of
Yeah,
systems, it
many. Who
seems.
knows?
Hetzel Prime is kind of the first one to be in danger, and then it just keeps spreading out. They eventually have to start really kind of developing advanced modeling
Hmm.
to determine where these are going to happen. So what appears to be true here is that on Brendok, some piece of that Legacy Run freighter must have landed with such force that it destroyed the planet or decimated the planet and
Yeah.
and killed all life. So that to me says a big chunk. I think a little of the Haldo maneuver, right? Like how
Yep.
that looked like something kind of coming into the planet in that way. Or Anakin shoots a capital starship into a planet, I think, in the Clone Wars at one
Yeah.
point. That's just a thing Anakin would do anyway,
It
even
would
if
be.
I'm remembering wrong. Uh, and so 100 years ago, this planet had no life, and then suddenly has life, and it appears that the Jedi investigate that by walking around and putting moss in a box,
Yeah.
which is kind of grating on them, it would seem.
They're studying life, the
Yeah.
emergence of life, the vergence of it. And Britt, you did the reading. Fantastic job in your book report here. And for the listeners at home, this that all takes place in what, the first 9 chapters of Light of the Jedi. So it's a great, like, the first part of that book, and it sets up everything that happens afterwards. Avar Kriss becomes the hero of Hetzel,
Mm.
and that sets her off on her journey, which we're now seeing in Phase 3 come to a fruition, and what that means for her and her character over time. So again, great way to introduce the High Republic at the end, or at least the books at the end of this era with the Acolyte here, and a great way to tie it into the current story that we're talking about today. So I'm always glad to see these connections. And it's interesting that they didn't call it the Great Hyperspace Disaster. Did you notice that as what
Mm.
they call it in the High Republic era? They just said a hyperspace disaster, meaning are there others that happen in between then,
Mm.
or are they doing some revisionist history here and just like being like, that was 100 years ago. We survived. We're good to go. It wasn't that bad.
Well, it does remind me of how it was the Great War until World War II, and
Yep.
then it became World War I. So I think you might be onto something with that question. And then, or I think it could just be it seemed horrific in that moment, as disasters often
Hmm.
do. But then 100 years later, when everybody who experienced it has passed on, you know. I'm trying to think of an equivalent. We still think a lot about 9/11 here in America,
Sure.
but we don't think about the sinking of the Lusitania that much, right? Which was one of those. Here in Boston, we still think about the Titanic a lot because it's tied to Babe Ruth in some ways. But yeah, I think it does make sense that it would just kind of fade in memory once the people who experienced it passed.
I tell you what, never forget the Lusitania.
That's
We
our
got
Roman Empire. We'll
everybody
talk
came
about
here to hear about Lusitania talk. So thank you, everybody. You came here for the show, and you're getting it. Oh
that.
yeah, it's great pull there, and again, everybody go check out the High Republic. Charles Soule does a great job writing that story, and again, once you're in it, you're hooked. You can't stop from there. You're always finding the next one after that.
That's definitely the one to try. If people are
Yes.
feeling like, everybody's talking about it, you gotta go for it. Start there. And I've had, I think, one friend quit because he didn't like it. But
Yeah.
everybody else I know who's read that, really went for it. But it is addictive once you get started on High Republic.
Hey, not everything's gonna be for everybody, but I'm glad to hear that a lot of people are taking to it and finding something amidst the plethora. They have the whole encyclopedia of characters
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
I love just pulling out on my shelf and just being like, oh yeah, I remember them. All right, so let's talk about Master Soul himself here. And
Mm.
what did you think about his motivations as showcased in this episode? Are they kind of based in nobility, as kind of suggested, or does it come from a place of fear?
So, your one of your previous guests brought up how this felt a lot it felt a lot about how colonists treated Native Americans here in
Hmm.
America.
Yeah.
And I think the duality of that treatment really felt present to me here as
Hmm.
well, because there's a way in which Soul's motivation is noble, but
Yeah.
that nobility has this shadow of kind of terrible paternalistic feelings. And I mean paternalistic literally in the sense of like father like, right? Like that
Yeah.
he felt
Yeah.
more he felt that the coven somehow doesn't deserve these children, right?
Hmm.
And they need to be taken away from them. And so I think up until this episode, Soul to me had felt fantastic, right? Soul
Yeah.
Patrol, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
sign me
Absolutely.
up. I'm in. I'm in. When Lee Jong-jae said he modeled his performance on Qui-Gon Jinn, I was like,
Hmm.
up, done. Top
Sign
5
me up.
character all
Yep.
time. Yep, I'm in. And so I think up until this episode, I would have just answered that he was purely noble or working for the good side. And
Hmm.
I think if you asked him, he would genuinely say he was acting to protect the girls and with pure nobility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things my wife and I always latch on to is the television show Friday Night Lights had this incredible married couple at the core of it. And the actors once said that you knew that it was a good marriage on television because whenever they had a fight, both characters were right.
Mm.
And what I love about Soul is that he's both right and wrong, right? And that's
Yeah.
what makes this episode so wonderful, is that he believes he's right. He believes deeply that he's doing this to protect the girls. And I think that is noble, right? You can't fault him for wanting to protect girls that he believes are about to be sacrificed, it seems, right?
Yeah.
That he thinks are in physical danger. And yet there's this edge to it that comes from
Hmm.
arrogance of the Jedi controlling the Force and the connection to the Force and how you should or should not connect with the Force. And I think the show wants us to see arrogance about this being a group of women, right? I
Mhm.
mean, they call them
Mm.
witches, which
Mm.
is a loaded term, right? It's a witch. I mean, how much can you attach our culture to Star Wars cultures? But witch as a term, I'm speaking like 5 miles from
I would
Salem
say,
right now,
yeah,
so I'm
you
there.
know what's in your backyard, what's happening over there.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know the
I
John
I'm here.
Proctor of it all, and
So it does seem like, that often has an undercurrent to it that's like crazy women who don't know what they're doing.
Mhm.
And I think all the Jedi kind of express that what these women are doing is it has that, again, to pull on the way that European colonizers hurt the Native American population. It's like
Mm.
savages, right?
Mm.
These brutal stereotypes of being less than human, of dehumanizing them. And I think that is what these Jedi, including Soul, does to this coven. And I think that's what makes me love this episode so much, is because
Yeah.
it's not black and white. And, I love Star Wars when it's black and white and it's easy to follow. But when you are trying to teach us something about our modern society, I think you can't just play on there's good guy, there's white hats and there's black hats. It
Mhm.
doesn't work like that, right?
Mhm.
That they're complicated in that way. So I think while I would love to be able to say my guy, Soul Patrol represent that is on the light side here, I think he's got this kind of arrogance that makes his action that really shapes those
Hmm.
actions.
Hmm. That's so well said there. Again, it's you mentioned this duality, right? Both can be right, right? The arrogance and the nobility can be there. Um, it's just so interesting how, like, literally he turns a corner and they're talking about attacking, and like, everything that he hears, right? Like we talked about, is like from the perspective of like, yeah, I would be alarmed if I probably heard those things as a person, and as a person that's supposed to be a protector of people and a defender of good and innocence out there, right? And if you see children kind of being forced to attack each other and being pushed down and all that stuff as your first introduction to this, and kind of being hidden away from the world and not being able to see things beyond what's inside this mining tunnel that they've got there. And then being forced to lie and do, when they're talking about the ascension, right? When May talks about it, she's not having in the loving, kind way that Mother Anasea explains it in episode 3. She's like, "No, we sacrifice each other, and it's a great time." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know about that." So like, I think he's just in this weird place of like, everything that he hears from a perspective makes sense for the actions that he undertakes. But knowing the full picture, it just adds to the tragedy of what happens, right? It's like, wow, if only he'd have shown up 5 minutes earlier and maybe heard a different part of that conversation in some ways, or if May had listened more to her mother and not been a child and forgotten keywords and rephrased it in certain ways, and they didn't use that as the rule of the law, right? They just didn't take that
Mm.
as face value as much. And of course, other choices made along the way, but this is specifically about Soul himself. And he just has this interesting connection automatically to OSHA for some reason. And I ask this question here on top of what I already asked here, but was it the will of the Force? Again, this gets back to the destiny and choice question
Mm.
here. Was it the will of the Force for OSHA and Soul to be connected? Was that potentially the Vergence here that they were sent to investigate? Vergence makes no sense to me just in general, but
Mm.
this explosion of the Force, is that the connection that they were really seeking to discover here? Was the two of them being connected, and does that set us on a path then to the events of Order 66?
Wow. Yeah. It's I would say, of the things in this episode that I struggled with, that's probably the biggest one, is that Soul so quickly and immediately feels attached to OSHA.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your question suggests the right thing, which is like, it almost feels like it has to be supernatural, like
Yeah.
something has to be speaking to him because it's so fast and sudden. Um, I did want to highlight in your comment, you mentioned May kind of changing those words. That was just such brilliant
It
writing.
is.
That like that's how a kid would try to represent what they had heard and slightly misspeak,
We've all played
and
telephone before. You know how that happens.
yeah, yeah, exactly. With religious rites.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really brilliant writing. So then that's me allowing me to then say, I maybe could have used one scene where Osha and Soul showed some kind of connection
Mhm.
that they because I maybe it's supposed to be left ambiguous, which the question notes, but like I feel like if it's supposed to be real and that is supposed to be that deep a connection, I think I needed some other signal of why that they felt that connection or
Mhm.
how he felt that. The episode 3 in Destiny, when we saw it, it was like, hey, I'm a cool guy in a cool outfit from out of town. Check out my sweet laser sword.
Yeah. Do you want one
And
too?
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I just described A New Hope as well. But it's kind of like, yeah, you show a kid a cool laser sword, they're gonna want to go get the cool laser sword. So it never felt like that deep a connection there. And so I think I kind of expected something to hint at it a little bit more.
Mhm.
Now, knowing that the actor at least sees a connection to Qui-Gon, I do think of Qui-Gon's, listen to the living force, and
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
Your focus determines your reality, and I love that side of Qui-Gon. And so maybe this really is just Soul following the will of the Force. But Mr. Qui-Gon Jinn also is the guy who, not a half hour later, changes the role of the chance cube in order to get what he wants, right? Not so much following the will of the Force on that one, Mr. Qui-Gon. So I do think that it's always got to be some combination of that kind of supernatural and that choice. But I think, you know, I don't want a flashback scene where Soul loses his pet gerbil and says, "Someday I'll raise something right," or something. So, but I do think there's got to be something in his character that's now I'm talking myself into it. Indara does say that's why I'm a teacher and you're not,
Yeah.
right? And that kind of suggests that he's wanted a Padawan for some time,
Mhm.
and has been denied it. But you know, I think we think a lot about teaching. I think so. It's hard to know, that line. In terms of this, what also came to mind is that Soul is essentially a mandated reporter, and he's afraid
Yeah.
of this abuse, and so he's attached to this child, but he's really fearful of that. But are we seeing a piece of why attachment is so strongly forbidden,
Yeah,
right? Because
absolutely.
it's the attachment that's pushing them to take many of these questionable actions.
Mhm.
I'm getting rambly, so you better come in with another really hard question or answer your own.
Well, and then we see the stranger talks to Osha in last week's episode. Like there was a connection on her side too to Soul. It wasn't
Mm,
just a one side reciprocated, not reciprocated back kind of thing. There was a strong bond between the two of them. Like he even still, even after she left, he still had that hologram of her. Right, like there's something even
mm,
beyond that. Like I don't know if it's just because of this event and the connection they shared over the last 10 years before she left the Order, but all that is still at play in my mind, and again, this is potentially showing why attachment is really forbidden, and why they're not even willing to make an exception for the potential chosen one to go hang out with his mom every now and then. Uh, Maybe this is the reason why, and they're like, if we cite the Jedi code and it's this C, Exhibit 1A Soul plus OSHA equals bad, then that might be the reasoning why that we're just never told about in the Phantom Menace and Attack of Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Um,
mm,
it is interesting too, the comparisons between Soul and Qui-Gon as well, which I think everyone's been doing to this point as well. Soul, differently, is very open about like his whatever's going on in his head. He's telling Indara, he's telling the world, right? I have a feeling she is destined to be my Padawan. Like this, I have a strong connection to
mm,
this. He's very vocal about that. Whereas Qui-Gon's not telling anybody. I assume he has the same feelings going on in his head. He's like, there's something about this boy. I have a strong connection to him. I kind of like him a lot. I'm gonna do what
mm.
I can to get him out of here. I'm gonna get him out of here one way or the other. It's not he's coming with me. Um,
True.
so I wonder if Qui-Gon been a bit more open with his thoughts, or at least said them out loud to somebody other than you know, maybe Jar Jar. Will we look at Qui-Gon perhaps in the same regards as we're questioning Soul in this sequence here? I don't know. I don't know. But I do have
Hmm.
another hard question for you here. And I'm
Hmm.
sorry again.
Okay.
Was he justified in killing Mother Anastasia? What is that? Oh, is that permissible? Is that forgivable? Is that passable based off of what happened in that situation? Or is this another holy crap that she's turned into a black mist of goo? I don't know what's happening here. And he thinks that's
Uh,
OSHA. He doesn't know that it's May. Um, that he makes that very clear. He says
I have
OSHA.
a really deep connection to this girl, but I can't tell when it's her
Exactly. I
or
can't
her
tell who's the
sister.
part
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But again, now that we learned they're basically the same person. It's minimal,
Mm,
if at all, difference. The only difference is
that's true.
the mark on her head. So I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that he I think if we put this in the space court of law, which Charles Soule has introduced some kind of military tribunals in the rebellion era in the comics, so we'll put it on one of those. I think he would be justified in his action. To me, this is why you get a manslaughter charge,
Mm-hmm.
not a murder
Mm-hmm.
charge. Look at me. First, I pretend I've seen Rashomon. Now I pretend I'm a lawyer.
Hey, man of
Definitely
many
not
hats here.
qualified to make that. Yeah, so, but I think, as I understand the difference, murder involves some premeditation and some, but this is more like a wrongful death. Like he
Yeah.
makes a flash judgment in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
In his head, he's entirely justified. However, I can't go that far because I do think it's this exoticization of their powers. He
Mm-hmm.
just assumes that this black mist, which to me looked like they were getting dusted by Thanos,
It did.
he just assumes that that's really dangerous. And
Mm.
my 9-year-old son Henry and I have been watching these together, and he and I fought both viewings about whether that's what happens when she controls Torbin. I was like, no,
Mm.
we've seen that. Like she doesn't like mist into him, but I don't exactly know what she was doing in that moment. It seemed protective. And then when the other witches do it, it doesn't necessarily seem like that's what takes over Kelnaka. It's not like
Oh, it
Kelnaka
doesn't.
breathed in the black
Yeah.
dust and yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I think because he just assumed that something that was unfamiliar was wrong, that's why I can't let him off the
Mm-hmm.
hook.
Mm-hmm.
Even though again, I shouldn't use the language flippantly, but there's a reason why I'm a professor, and if I see even an adult student with bruises or who admits trouble, I have a responsibility
That's
to
right.
report what I've seen, and it's much more important when it comes to teachers of young children. And so I do think that there's a way in which if he really deeply believed that OSHA slash May, and it was May, but he thought it was OSHA, was about to be killed, I think he was justified.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this resonates with the High Republic in ways that I will make just a little vague, which is we have a Jedi who committed a murder of an innocent person, believing them to be evil,
Mm-hmm.
to be doing something wrong. And it really shook this Jedi to the core and has been the subject of, 2 books so far
Yeah.
of him kind of dealing with it. And sorry, them. I'll keep it even more. Who knows what gender they are?
Who?
Um, yeah, maybe it's a
Maybe
Wookiee.
it's a what? Who
So,
knows?
so I do think that this is what Soul has been working on. He's been doing his soul searching
Oh,
for
love
the
it.
last
Love it.
10 years around these events, because I think it has to stay with you because it is the murder of an innocent woman at the end of the day.
Again, it's one of those catch-22s, right? He doesn't know what's going on. It seems like it's a anybody that just walks into that situation that sees something turn to mist in front of you is gonna probably assume X, X equals bad, right? And he's
Yeah.
again, as you noted, anybody with that authority that the Jedi give to themselves via the Senate of being these protectors across the galaxy, they have to step in anytime they see evil, wrongdoing, badness, right? Or at least that's what a good Jedi should do.
Mm.
Theoretically, I know that there's some other things out there that would say otherwise, right? I think of that deleted scene from Last Jedi, where
Oh
Rey
yeah.
is told not to go help out this community because that's not what a Jedi would do. But in
Mm.
this case, the Jedi would. So little both can happen here. Um, it's just, again, hard choices. What I like to call this episode in a different light. They called it choice, but there's a term that I learned in college again that mostly relates to like the Holocaust and genocide studies. Is the concept of choiceless choices, where you
Mm.
don't really have a good choice to be made based off of the situation that's presented in front of you here. And I think that based off the situation that is presented in front of Soul here, he made the choice that was like the quick one that is like, I know this will save X child no matter what. And if that's my ultimate goal, I need to do that. And regardless, I'm taking on this choice here. So
Mm.
that's kind of where I'm at with this one, but it is one of those head scratchers of, I think people philosophically could discuss this for hours and hours and hours on end, whether it's a righteous thing, a justified thing, whether he should repent for the rest of his days because of it. Should he at least report himself to the High Council, which he says I should probably do, and maybe threatens he's going to do later on. We'll see if that actually happens or not. And Dara is pretty clear about it. It's like, no, we're sticking to our story, and that's it. So and he has to live with the guilt afterwards, which is clearly still haunting him as he's been thinking about what he would say to May all these years later if that was the case. And she's been going around, Jedi kill people. Jedi do kill unarmed people, and this is the result event that she's referring to
Mm.
when she says stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
like, no, you do. And the question is, if you have the Force, or if you're a Force user, if you're a Force cult member, that type of thing, are you ever unarmed? I guess is the question.
Mm.
So you could always pull that out at any moment, right? You could always force push them away, force choke them, lightning bolts come out of your fingertips, right? Anything of that sort. Are you ever unarmed if that is the power you can tap into? And if you're already tapping into dark magic, are you ever unarmed? Which I think is another valuable question to bring up. Like even potentially when Anakin says Sudoku, right? He's unarmed. But is he? This is a question that I've never thought all these years. I shouldn't do this. This is not the Jedi way. He's an unarmed person here. Now, granted, he probably surrendered at that point, which is a different kind of act.
Yeah.
And Palpatine as well, right? But again, another person that kind of takes that moment on Mace Windu when he's like, no, he should stand trial. He's unarmed. This isn't the Jedi way. Fair question. I don't know. I have the answer to this, and I will leave it to the scholars of Star Wars to really define that for us.
I'm not a scholar of Star Wars, so I won't fully answer the question, but I do think I think it comes I guess the question I still have about the Coven is, are they actually using dark magic?
Yeah.
They
The
are
Jedi are assuming that.
using, yeah, and they're using, powers that are unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever she was doing to Torbin, which in Destiny felt like he was being like tortured, but this actually felt more like Galadriel in Frodo's head,
Yeah,
like
it was like a
asking
seduction in
questions.
a way.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like it felt like manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
but not control.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a huge difference, right? Because
Yeah.
somebody who's affecting you, yes, that's a negative influence perhaps, but if you still have some amount of choice, then
Yeah.
then I don't think it's fully dark sidey. So um I I think to the broader question you asked, I think that you have to consider Jedi of any kind to be capable of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of powers you listed, I would put in the dark side skill
Sure.
tree
Sure.
from
Yeah.
whatever Star Wars video game. Your KOTOR, right? You have to be on that side of the morality tree. Um, and so I think that's my cheat, is that a
Mm-hmm.
Sith Lord is never unarmed,
Mm.
but I don't think any of the light side powers are lethal.
Mm. Okay.
And does that now, if I'm a space police officer and I have a Jedi under arrest, does that distinction matter at all? Maybe not, right? But it feels to me like Jedi should be regularly unarmed,
Hmm.
capable of defense, but not capable of striking out. And yet we see, I mean, they always have one of the most powerful weapons in the galaxy, a lightsaber on their hip, ready to
Readily
go.
available.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so it does feel hypocritical. And I have enjoyed how this. I think the Phantom Menace shows that the Jedi Order is on the way down,
Hmm.
but this show has really showed me, my interpretation is that they kind of deserved it, right? That they
Yeah.
had gotten too far into the role. They'd moved beyond peacekeeping and into some kind of control,
Yeah.
right? And obviously this, I want to be sensitive, this has resonances to contemporary events
Sure.
and the way
Absolutely.
we're questioning policing in our society and in a lot of ways. But there's a way in which, is peace the absence of conflict, or is it something greater than that, right? and
Yeah.
and I think the Jedi are falling into this trap of, we just have to eliminate all conflict, and going too far. And I guess I'm accidentally saying Order 66 was justified, which I don't mean, but it's like it to me all speaks to, we are out of balance, and we might just
Hmm.
need a chosen one to pull things back into balance,
That's
which
right.
unfortunately means a lot of Jedi are
It
gonna
means
die.
zeroing out across the board. a,
Yeah.
a prophecy definitely misread across the board. Well, and maybe perhaps the most black and white choice made in this episode is the choice to save Osha over May on the bridge. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that one? Because you can clearly see the remorse in the actor Lee Jung Jae's face when he realizes, like, I don't have the ability, the strength to hold up both of them at this moment here. I can only save one. I'm chance cubing this one, the right?
Yeah. Well, that was really interesting to me, how different that was than how the Destiny episode
Mhm.
presented it, right? And boy, does that gets to the heart of the two titles, right? That
Yeah.
what felt like destiny, that was really the choice of
Yeah.
someone else, and in a really cool and interesting way. My not at all deep thought on that one is, called it, because
Mm.
in our episode covering the opening pair of episodes, I believe, I made the comparison to the cinematic masterpiece The Good Son, which was very popular in my middle school sleepover circles,
Okay.
but comes to a crazy moment where a mother has to choose between two children, one of whom has been seemingly a problem child and the other one seemingly angelic, but they really are the opposite. Great early Elijah Wood, Macaulay Culkin roles. Definitely seemed great when I was a middle schooler. But I said we were going to build to a moment like this, and so I'll take this as I think there was a moment where he had to choose, and I think you read it exactly right. He wasn't happy about it. He
Mhm.
felt that attachment to Osha, but he's not a monster. He didn't want to let the girl die, and you know I think we've now seen many times that this is the way Jedi reach their limits. This is how Indara was killed in
Mhm.
the premiere. Is she had to protect somebody and has a limit to her power. And it reminds me of Attack of the Clones. Dooku gets away by dropping something
A
on
cylinder, a
Anakin and
big pillar
Obi-Wan.
of something?
Yeah. And I think in the novelization, Obi-Wan is laying there unconscious, but in the film,
He's
he's
definitely
wide
under that
awake and
too,
just kind of
yeah.
watching. And like he's got a little cut on his leg.
And
I don't know.
Yoda's
That film
tired.
did Obi-Wan dirty a little bit. As a Kenobi lover, I have to note that. So it does feel like this is that kind of thing where we've seen, like, they are not gods. They can only do so much at once, and there are limits on their powers.
Yeah.
And you know, I knew exactly what his choice would be, and I think that means it's been good characterization, and should mean he has some apologies to be making to May at the start of next episode. But again, if I'm interpreting the frame correctly, I think this is him confessing to May that I
Mhm.
tried to save you both, but had to choose just Osha, and
Yeah.
did choose just Osha.
And then she'll clap back and say, "Why did you pick her over me?" How dare you? I'm better than
Yeah.
her. I don't know. It's interesting. I like he made a choice, and that's something he's had to live with, and now he's facing the consequences right in his face here. Right? It's all come back to not only haunt them because May is taken out and the stranger has taken out a lot of their friends as a result of this situation, this catalyst event. But now he literally has to look May in the eyes and be like, "I'm sorry, I chose your sister over you." Wow, that's
Yeah.
hard. That's hard stuff.
That's hard, and well, and I'm wondering, I don't think it's particularly clear where they're going right now.
That's true.
I I we got that moment in episode 6 where like they disappeared just as Vernestra arrived, and it made it feel like they were running away, but
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure they were. You know, they could be going to Coruscant, and he's going to go confess to the High Council and come clean.
Hmm.
I think, and this was, I think it was maybe Ross guessing, or maybe it was you guessing that maybe they're going to Brendok, right?
Maybe
Like back to where it all
relive it.
began,
Yep.
right?
Relive it.
Yeah, and see what's happened. I think those are two strong possibilities. Maybe he's just given up on life and he's going to Glee Ensemble to
Yeah.
learn to play the Valichord. Maybe, I don't know.
We kind of you speculated on this bit, and I'm now fully on the side of I want them to go to Coruscant, and I want May to pull out from the Jedi archives the exact report on this situation with a young
Mm.
intern Jocasta Nu helping out find this record in there, and then something to the extent of, well, if it
Right.
doesn't exist in Jedi archives, and it's not here. I would love that sequence, and I want to talk about Torbin here because this is an interesting
Mm.
one here of this bunch. He wants to go home. Right? This is he's had enough. I don't know how long they've been out here in on Brendok. It could have been weeks, months. He's tired. He's had enough. I'm ready to get out of here. And he doesn't really understand the purpose or importance of what's going on, and it forces him down this path. Like I said, getting seduced in a way by Mother Anasea. Are
Mm.
you okay with the answer that is provided here for why he's essentially the catalyst for this major action, which then leads to him being, I'm taking the brash vow. I can't really live with what I did here. And then he can't live with what he's doing here and takes his own life because of that.
I mean, that's a sad life story you just described, right? If this is the whole of Torbin's
Loses
story,
his hair
that
too.
is
Like,
rough.
man really gets the bad end of the stick on all things.
Oh, poor guy. We're in Phantom Menace year. My studio decorated to
Absolutely.
celebrate it. It brings to mind Qui-Gon saying to Anakin, when he's been freed and he offers Anakin the chance to leave Tatooine, he says, "Being a Jedi is a hard
Hmm.
life," and I think, to me, I draw a straight line from that to Yoda saying adventure, excitement, a Jedi craves not these things. Um, and that's the truth of it, is the majority of Jedi knights live lives that look, especially during this time, look like what we saw them doing, which is small scale
Hmm.
works and deeds. Again, to continue the policing analogy, it's what we call community policing, right? Where you go fix the broken windows
Sure.
and so on to try to build those relationships. And that's not what people tend to dream about when they want to be a police officer or a Jedi Knight.
Generally not.
They want the excitement and they want a lot. It's interesting to try to imagine what's in Torbin's head at this moment, because we've alluded to the fact that the Nile happened, and
Hmm.
so you would imagine the Jedi Order talks about 100 years ago, man, things got crazy and we had to go everywhere and a whole bunch of us turned to stone.
Yes.
Um, and there were these man-eating plants.
Don't get me started.
But but like in this time period, like what does Torbin think the life will be? And so I want to shout out a character named Imri
Mm.
Kentaros,
Yep.
who is Vernestra's Padawan, and he seems to be a kindred spirit
Mhm.
to Torbin. That he is kind of a bookish Padawan, doesn't want to leave Coruscant, wants to be with Jocasta in the library, in the archives all the time. and doesn't want to go out and have adventures and kind of gets forced out into the galaxy in the course of events. And I feel like Torbin, that was Torbin.
Mm-hmm.
And George Lucas spelled it out so simply so long ago. Jedi are selfless, Sith are selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And so Torbin was not cut out for the selfless life.
Yeah.
And that cost him. And I do think that the Barash vow means that he took that to heart and realizes how wrong and selfish he was, and that if he couldn't be a true Jedi Knight, he was better living in a force bubble.
Literally, literally. I'll just meditate
Yeah.
for the rest of my days until I have this opportunity to like, well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I don't. I relate to him. Let me just say that, right? I
Mm.
think like a lot of us. Again, I don't know how long they've been on this planet, just picking up moss, as you said. I'm presuming he's around 16, 17, based off of still a Padawan and all that stuff. Um, who among us wasn't a 16 or 17-year-old and what wasn't in a place for an hour or two before we wanted to do something else?
Mm.
How could we potentially see the larger picture at hand? And then when you're offered the chance of, all right, we got the answers right in front of us. Well, what are we doing? Let's get it and get out of here.
Yeah.
Who knows what other things we got going on at home? Like I could be watching the the next HoloNet drama, right? Who knows what's coming on? I can't necessarily blame him for wanting that based off of his age, and maybe that's the fault of his master. Again, not explaining the full, letting him just sit there and stew in his boredom, his misery, just letting that go. Versus Soul coming in and saying like, "Hey, here's the reason why this is actually a pretty good thing. It's kind of an honor to do this. Actually, you look at it from that way. Look at it from a different perspective. Maybe
Mm.
that's the way that would have worked with him better, rather than Indara being like, and that's why you don't have a Padawan." I don't know. Maybe we're all reached differently here, and perhaps might have that choice might have changed things differently. But he then made his choice and then said, "We're going after them," leading to
Mm.
all these events happening, and I don't know. Soul kind of got what he wanted, one way or the other,
Yeah.
because of this. So he kind of has him to thank at the end of the day for everything, not necessarily for what happens and all the death that comes of it, but he gets Osha joins leaves with them and goes to Coruscant, becomes a Jedi for a minute, and then the rest happens.
Yeah, I only want to add to that comment, which was excellent. With Indara does have a line where she says, "Are you confusing his motivations for your own?" And
Mm.
so
Mm.
I think we are signaled that Soul
Mm.
is also feeling that restlessness,
Yeah.
and maybe that should have been part of my answer to his intentions. That's kind of mingled into that as well. That it seems he also is not having a great time and not thinking their work is important. And so then Osha becomes a way in which this work could have been a
Yeah.
really important trip and worth the time they spent. I have 7 weeks stuck in my head. I feel like they maybe shout that out, that they've been
Yeah.
there. And let's assume a week on Brendok is 17
That's also
years.
true. You never
No,
know the time of the planet itself. That could be entirely different. Wow. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
it could
whole
be a
other.
really, really long time.
Ooh. And what I like too is that like Legion J plays Soul a lot more emotional in this episode,
Mm,
confrontational, a bit more angry and aggressive than what we have seen in the rest of the series so far. This calm, collected, right? 16 years has changed the man, both with age and
yeah.
wisdom, but he's calmed down a bit, right? Maybe training those Padawans has made him a different person, working with the youngling specifically, and all that. But then I think we saw a bit of that old Soul come back out in episodes 5 Night, and then last week's episode as well, and dealing with May, right? I think some of that like quick,
Mm.
uh, brash, rushed, aggressive, conversational style, confrontational in a way, maybe came back to the forefront a bit. So maybe we're just hiding underneath the surface again. Interesting.
Yeah, well, the Masters, probably my favorite line of the series, when Soul says, "What kind of master hides his face from his pupils?" And the master's like, "You tell me," right? Like that's it, right?
Yeah. Oh
Like
my gosh.
that
Yes. Yes.
he's been masking all of this and hiding all of this, and
Oh.
I think it's really wonderful to have a character who feels so right, but has done these terrible things, because unfortunately
Mm.
that's the real world. I
Yes.
mean, what do we see? But our heroes,
Oh.
eventually disappoint us, and we have to deal with that. And I was just telling a friend recently who was kind of struggling with they're getting divorced from their spouse, and they're like, what
Mhm.
are my kids going to think and all this? And I said, the moment you mature is when you realize your parents were just people probably trying to do their best, but they were just human beings.
They
And
were
like,
30. They
I
were
think,
30 trying to figure it out themselves.
yeah, and then you're 30 and you're like, I wasn't
What am I
ready for
doing?
this. So you're like, I don't know how to microwave this dinner, let alone raise a child to be a thoughtful, empathetic human. And so I do think that um, I, I'm an unabashed Last Jedi fan for this exact same reason,
Sign us up. Yeah.
which is that I do think that Star Wars created a necessary mythology that was really plain and simple,
Mhm.
because in the late 70s and early 80s, everything in America was deeply complicated
That's what
and
they needed.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we needed to just be like, it's really hard to figure out this Vietnam thing. Let's just escape into a world of light side, dark side, and it'll be easy. And I think Last Jedi for me personally is so powerful, because it really says like it's not that. Like, I'm sorry. I wish it was that, but it's not that. And sometimes your heroes will make bad choices
Mhm.
and they won't be who you want them to be. And I do think that from in the real world, from 83 to 2018, you know we had the a kind of social group of young men and women, but a lot of dudes my age, that just kind of embraced that and read the world through, oh, you're with
Mm.
me or you're against me, only Siths deal in absolutes.
Yep.
And that's kind of ruining our society, and so we have to start complicating that picture. And
Mm.
I appreciate that. I think Last Jedi tells us to question everything a little more deeply and to look beyond those dualities, and I think this is participating in that as well. Where I land, Soul is still a really good guy. He gets up every day and he tries to do the right
Sure.
thing, but that does not excuse the evil in his past.
Yep.
And I can see people in our society trying to do the right thing every day, but that doesn't mean they get a pass on other mistakes they've made
Sure.
in the past.
You get to, and then face your past, face your, ask forgiveness. There are many ways to achieve that. There's always an opportunity for redemption. That's at the core of Star Wars.
Yeah,
So we'll see if
true.
he maybe self-actualizes himself to a form of redemption or forgiveness of himself. 'Cause it feels like he still hasn't reached that self-forgiveness yet. Maybe he wants that from
Mm.
another person to say, "I forgive you." Um, he said, I worked all the, he said in the earlier episodes, I've worked many years to forgive myself for what happened from them." Like, I don't know if you really have at this point, but maybe he actually needs that May right there to say, like, okay, I hear what you said. Like, I hear your perspective on this one. I was only 8 at the time. I'm so sorry. Like, it's a tragic situation for all of us. I forgive you. And maybe that changes the whole gambit, and uh, May maybe turns into a better person because of that. She's able to let that hate go in her heart, and maybe Osha then turns towards a darker path. Who knows? Who knows, guys?
I think we don't know which one is the red moon and which one is the blue moon. We only know
Ooh.
there's a red moon and a blue moon. So yeah, I think what you just described is entirely possible. I'm just going to steal the word from episode 2 for it, which is absolution, right? Which is what Kymir
Yes.
says Torbin craves, is
Yes.
absolution, and only May can make these Jedi whole again.
Yeah.
And she chose for the first two to kill them. I guess she did not kill Kilnaka. I'm assuming the master
Yeah,
killed
that makes
Kilnaka.
sense.
And so then what will she choose for Soul? I think she might choose forgiveness, because she seems to be wavering in her commitment to the dark side. At the moment that, man, Osha, she seems like she's being seduced in every meaning of that word into the dark side of the Force.
Ooh, twists and turns at every corner, and I got another twist and turn here that kind of
Ooh.
that's just the one that I'm like, I don't really understand what happened here, and I hope we can maybe talk through this a bit here. But so in the in the battle, right? There's that battle that ensues. Kelnaka is taken over by the witch coven. He's possessed, leading him to both scarring Torbin, and then he's freed by Indara. And the witches in the coven seem to pass away. Do they die? What do you make of that? They just kind of fall over. Are they just pooped and tired? Are they done? Uh, what's the deal here? Was it like a last? The only thing I could think of comparatively is again that Last Jedi thing where Luke was projecting himself, and that took away
Mm.
his life force there, um, because of that action for so long to do that, and but a whole coven of witches doing that. But again, it's a Wookiee. I don't know what the level of strength it needs to in order to possess a Wookiee and fight other Jedi. But where'd your mind go when you saw that and the time since?
Again, you're hitting on a Henry question because both rewatches he asked me, why does it take all of them to control the Wookiee? And I don't know the answer to that. I think what I told him, which is just me making stuff up because that's what you do when you're a parent.
Yep.
Again, 30-year-old trying to do
You're just getting
something,
by.
trying to do the best they can. Just yeah, getting through the day. I told him that I don't think all of the witches are as powerful as Mother Anastasia. I
Hmm.
think there's a reason she's the leader,
Yeah.
and so maybe it takes all of them channeling their force powers. Uh so I see your Luke and Last Jedi, and I raise you two other force possibilities,
Okay.
which is and you implied one of these, a Grogu nap, because we know
Hmm.
Grogu needs a little nappy pie
That's
every
true.
time he uses the Force in some deep way. And then Rey and Kylo swap in Life Force
Hmm.
in Rise of Skywalker,
Hmm.
which shockingly I can talk about in a sane way, despite confessing that I'm a Last Jedi fan. Time heals all
It
wounds.
sure does.
But I think, as I interpret the end of The Rise of Skywalker, is Ben chooses to give his life force to bring Rey back,
Yeah,
but it's like a zero-sum game. There's not enough to keep them both alive.
that's true.
So um, is their power drawing on their life force? That I don't know about. I definitely think they're dead. I guess my lingering question is, what did Indara do?
Hmm.
Because
Mm.
in some ways it just feels like he was being puppeted like a marionette, and she cut the strings,
Okay.
and by breaking that bond she just freed Kelnaka.
Yeah.
But it is the moment he's free that they all go. And so
Yes.
is it that the force, the strength, I should say, because it gets confusing to use force in that regards too. The strength of the connection means that the breaking of it shatters their minds in some way, and shatters their bodies.
Hmm.
I think feels possible, but it felt a little weird if it's the breaking
I
that does
agree.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of those where I'm like, is it like a video game? 'Cause I think in like Battlefront or something like that, you got to play as Kylo Ren invading someone's mind, and like you just did a lot of killing in the mind.
Mm.
And it was like, is that what Indara did? Did she have to go in there and literally sever, like you said, the connection via killing them in their brains through the Force, but their bodies don't have any like residue because of that, right?
Yeah.
uh, I
Yeah.
think of like again a Padme kind of thing too, right? Anakin force chokes her, and that's why, in my opinion, the droid is like medically we don't know why we're losing her. Yeah, because he force choke. I don't know if like you can see the like the scars of choking from a force choke because of that. So
Mm.
again, the force works in mysterious ways, of course. Who knows?
But I do think they have to die for Torbin to be this upset
Hmm.
and take the Barash vow, and then take the poison.
Yeah.
And uh, and I think that it's important that Indara, who often seems the most in control, either by her action or deliberately or by her accidental action, killed over 50 women, right?
Hmm.
Because they confirmed that
Yeah.
number
At
earlier
least.
in the episode. And so when she alters their report at the end, like, she's covering up a pretty big sin on her part, not
I
just
mean,
kinda all
she's not with
these
the Jedi
events.
either 16 years later. She's off in
That's
some
true.
bar place just kind of hanging out as a nomad.
Noodle shop.
Noodle shop, yeah.
Yeah. As we all hope to be one day. So well, and really truly, when my son asked me, I'm like, "I'm not sure," but I blamed Indara. I was like, I think the breaking of the connection killed them. I'm not entirely sure why. I do not listen to the YouTube hate baiters, but I
Mhm.
could see people complaining that they needed a little more explanation there,
And this is
and
why we need
I
a
can't necessarily.
novelization of, like, TV
Mm.
shows, right? So that we could get inside this extra scene that is not presented there, because this would certainly be a great passage in a book, right? Indara then
Yeah,
infused her
yeah.
brain into Kelnaka to calm him down, and then it had to explain the whole nitty-gritty of it all that you just can't really get into in a quick 45-minute TV series. Um, I think that would be great, and maybe we'll get more details about it perhaps in a later date and time. But right now, it was one of those deals where I'm like, oh, so that's how they all fell over. And of course, I think to yes and what you said there, I think May, who survives the whole ordeal, would have went back and at least checked everybody again to see if anybody survived.
Mm.
Now, the one person that I really don't see at all is the other mother, Mother
Yeah.
Colvin. I can't never remember.
Coral.
Coral. Okay, uh,
Yeah.
she's not there. So what does that present? I know a lot of people, when the episode 3 came out, they investigated and they didn't see her body amongst the dead. She's out there and she was baiting May, right? That she's the other
Yeah.
catalyst that was looking for a fight. And she even pulls her,
Yeah.
like, she pulls her whatever axe javelin thing that she had first on the fight. So maybe
Yeah.
even that could be used as a, like, they weren't unarmed, they just pulled out their weapons first, kind of ordeal. I mean, it all really doesn't matter at the end of the day, they all die. So it's just semantics at that point of who's justified if not. But again, where's she in the play? Does she have a role to play in this, in perhaps in the future? I don't know. I know a lot of people speculate that she might have been the stranger until Chimere revealed himself. Is she maybe
Yeah.
the master above Chimere?
We haven't met any nice members of that species, have we? I don't know. I guess there's Sugi, the bounty hunter,
Yeah,
isn't that
not
bad.
terrible.
Uh, I do think it's notable. So as I'm recalling the episode, she transforms to dust
Yep.
when they kind of all do to get away from Kelnaka's attack, and then we just don't see her again.
Yep,
Period.
that's
So,
correct.
and I'm conscious of the fact that we're running out of time. So I don't think we'll get any additional flashback.
Mhm.
This is obviously speculation on my part. I have no answers, but I don't think there's time for any more clarification on this. Like I was saying earlier, we're not going to get the here's the truth version. I think we're going to stay in the present day,
Mhm.
and it seems interesting that I don't think she can just show up in the present day without some hint. But again, I Chimere knows an awful lot about
He
these
does,
events.
and he
And is
wasn't
that
there.
May? Is that yeah, like I have a lot of questions about where he gets his knowledge. And, Mother Coral would be a great strand to pull back if this
Mhm.
show gets a season 2, right? Like,
Mm.
I know who you really are or something like that.
Yes, hello, my child.
So I think yeah, there's a lot of potential there, but I always temper my expectation game by remembering all the theories about Mephisto on WandaVision
Yep.
and just say like it's never as complicated as we think it's going to be. So I think we've probably seen the last of her, but I would love to see that in a season 2 potentially.
Yeah, no, we're
Is my
speculating
guess.
responsibly here. It's all fun and games, and
Doing
then
that.
we'll get the story that is presented to us. As we've said, the creators are
Yeah.
paid for this, and they went to school for this, so they've earned the right to tell us the story in the way that they are meant to, and we're not just people saying you should hire YouTubers to tell the story, because that'll go great. I can tell you. I've seen
Oh,
those fan
oh
films.
God.
They're gonna get wild and crazy. And speaking of like a story, right? I think we've alluded to this already here, but the Jedi kind of put their story together when they leave, right? They say,
Mm.
well, May started the fire, they all died, we walk away. That's kind of how it goes. Is there, and their reasoning again was to be like, Osha already lost everything. Like, this is her opportunity to be a Jedi here, what she wanted. Why would you potentially take away Soul, leave it up to the Jedi Council if he goes up to them and tells them exactly what happened word for word? Is there reasoning for withholding these certain aspects of the truth from a certain point of view okay in this
Mm.
instance, in your opinion?
I think sometimes we fall into the trap of assuming that the Jedi are normal, well-adjusted adults.
Yeah.
And remember that these are weird space monks who were stolen from their families and raised in a really weird monastery that is now very full of people, but often looks pretty empty
Mm-hmm.
and lonely and isolating. So um, I I think I do think again to maybe the theme of the episode tonight is that their intentions are good and they do think that this child deserves something and that if she has nothing left, let's give her this.
Yeah.
But I think that's uh being used too far. That's being
Mm-hmm.
stretched too
Mm-hmm.
far to spackle over these serious things because all four of these characters made choices that need to be examined
Mm-hmm.
by themselves. And given what we know of the structure of the Jedi Order, it would seem by the High Council to
Sure.
determine
Absolutely.
whether they've overstepped their duties. And it seems to me that their motivation in lying about the story, even though they're telling themselves it's to protect Osha and give her her dream, it's really to protect themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to suffer. And so, um, I'm then curious how they each end up coming around to where we found them in the original episodes, right? I think we're assuming Torbin took it most heavily
He
because
did.
he was there, and I think I don't remember if they say if it's been 10 years. I think it was around 10 years that he hasn't spoken to anybody
Yeah.
in 10
Yeah.
years,
I can't
so
remember
since
off
he
the top of
took
my
the
head.
vow,
Yeah.
but a long time. I think Soul, it appears now, overcompensated by when we first meet him and he's teaching a class. Vernestra says like, "Oh, you're such an amazing teacher, and they're so lucky to have you." And I think that's a natural response, is to throw yourself and out of that kind of guilt
Mm-hmm.
to throw yourself into the job and to do really good work, but really be trying to cover up the fact you once did something kind of terrible.
Yeah.
Um, so I understand why they told themselves that they were protecting Osha, but I just think it was selfish in the end, and that they were
Mm.
trying to protect themselves, and
Mm.
that's why they're dealing with it all these years later. Because if they'd done the right choice, all of this would have been taken care of.
Yes. Yes. That's beautifully said. It is the most selfish thing of perhaps of this entire episode, is them choosing to the winners write history, right? And they've
Yeah,
won this battle, and they've said this is the narrative that we're going with, and if it's written in the Jedi archives as such, 15 generations later, no one's going to think anything of it. Whereas, and then they'll move on and do the rest, and they're still harboring some ill will on it, but for the most part, they're, aside from Torbin, they're thriving and functioning to a large degree. um
yeah,
it is one of those of like, again, and Star Wars has this history. Maybe this is where it starts, of from a certain point of view, I told you what you needed to hear at the right time, right? if
yeah.
if Luke Skywalker is told everything that is really the truth, technically, at the front of A New Hope, there he's going to say, well, it's been fun knowing you, weird space wizard. I'm going away to I'm going to Anchorhead, and we'll go from there. I'll see you at Tossie Station and maybe the cantina one of these days, but we'll see you later. He would have ran away from that
Yeah.
challenge and all that stuff. So maybe they would have. I don't know if he would eventually would have told Osha the 100% exact truth. Uh, I don't. It's again. This episode presents a lot of these hard questions that, of like, if I was in their again, the parents are just people trying to get through the day too.
Yeah.
They're fallible people. They make mistakes, and this could be the greatest example of, wow, my Jedi teacher made a terrible mistake and decided to live a life based off of a lie, and all these other Jedi did it as well, and now we're reaping these horrible consequences 16 years later because of it. Wow. Well, this episode was really just giving a lot more theoretical thought and philosophical discussion about what we would do in perhaps these situations and perhaps any other Star Wars property to this point. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Well, and you're right about parents, and we should also lump teachers into that,
Teachers
right?
too.
Like,
Yeah.
we make mistakes,
Absolutely.
one of my nastiest teaching evaluations I ever received hurt so bad because it was correct. Because a
Mm,
student had asked me, like, I was leaving the building, running out the door, and they were like, "Greg, I keep getting B pluses. How do I make it an A? Like, I really want to get an A." And
yeah.
I said something quick and rushed that was like, "Well, you just write it a little better." And they totally flamed me on my eval, and like, and I deserved it. And that's why it hurt so bad
Yeah.
is it's like, yeah, I should have. That's a student asking and coming to me and wanting something. And that's the role of a teacher here. And even if Soul is doing great work now, his previous students deserved the full
Sure.
truth and deserved a kind of reckoning with that. And that's the nature of the gig. I mean, it's we all know teachers in our society are so highly paid and just live these lucrative lifestyles, but they
Mm,
they earn it. No way, they're way too low paid for the incredible burdens they hold, and that's one of them. Like, that every small decision you make in front of a student impacts them, and you never know the ones that are really gonna. You never know that sticking the sticky notes on one wall and then the other will change the path of young
you literally
Anthony.
have no idea what that would do to somebody, and all those people probably still to this day have no idea. But shout out to Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. You did a good job in raising up a great liberal arts person that has led us to
Yay!
this point in time. And Greg, I got one last question for you here, and this might be
Good. I'm
another
sweating because these have been tough.
this this might
Yeah,
be
you've done
another
my
tough one
my
here.
work
So
here.
we're ending, of course, on a big tough one.
Go for it.
Is there an inherent hypocrisy for the Jedi to be the guardians of peace and justice in the Republic?
Whew. Is
Where
there?
does their jurisdiction end if there is one?
It ended somewhere between Coruscant and Brendok. That I'm sure of, right? I think these Jedi are overstepping. And man, again, I'm gonna hit back to the refrain I started with, which is the point of mythic storytelling is to make you ask big questions and think about your society and your
Hmm.
culture and the times you live in. And boy, is that question you just asked so important to modern policing, politics, just the way we
Absolutely.
humans are interacting with each other. And if a Star Wars show is tackling a question that big, then it's doing something
Hmm.
right, my friends. It's
Absolutely.
really it's speaking to something that bigger as a part of this. I'm going to slightly reword your question and say I think it is hypocrisy for anybody to get to dictate the terms of peace and justice
Hmm.
in the galaxy for anybody else.
Hmm.
When we look at the cultures in our world, there are such vast differences in values, and we may not agree with all those values, but each culture gets the right to set their own as long as
Yes.
it's not doing harm, right?
Yeah.
If it's not,
From a place of
causing
good things.
suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah, then we need to respect those cultures and say it's different than us, but we respect it. And so then when you know, exponentially expand that to the thought of a single entity, a single institution ruling millions of planets of different species, then you can't protect peace and peace and
Peace and
justice in
justice.
this galaxy. Peace and justice. You can't protect peace and justice in a way that is true.
Hmm.
And peace can just mean, again, modern policing, we say keeping the peace, right?
Yeah.
It's like making sure there's not
Yeah.
conflict, but
It's keeping
you
order.
know, keeping order, right? Yeah, exactly the right word. If order is considered peace, then people are getting pushed aside.
Hmm.
Their wants and desires are there. Justice is such a hard value. We should all aspire to it. It's good. That's what society is built
Mm-hmm.
upon, is finding justice for all its individuals. But you're going to fail if you're one centralized institution trying to regulate that for everyone. They are unable to live by their own values.
Mm-hmm.
They're unable to act justly, which is essentially the definition of hypocrisy, right?
Yes.
Is holding people to a standard that you can't live up to
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And I think then the Jedi of this era are failing, and to me the answer is that nobody could do it. Um, oh, I really don't
Oof.
like how that's a message to our current political moment, but
Oof.
like,
The ties are there.
democracy is hard. It is
Mm-hmm.
messy and it's terrible, but like we have to believe that when done right, it can be that. And I think the Jedi are showing us that in the Star Wars galaxy, the way the arc of history works is that the Jedi can't achieve peace, and so the Empire will achieve order
Mm-hmm.
through
Mm-hmm.
fascism, right?
Yes.
Through the stormtrooper boot. And I think that's the tragedy. And
Mm.
boy, do I hope after Rise of Skywalker we could build something new and righteous, a new Jedi Order perhaps,
Fingers
but
crossed, Ray.
it's tough.
That's a daunting task that you have
Good
laid.
luck.
Yeah, good luck
Good
with that
luck.
one. I don't envy your. Better get some friends around you to create this. Find Grogu. He's probably out there somewhere,
Oh,
and
definitely.
maybe Ahsoka's still around. You can get some people together and get a new Jedi Order going and see what is right, what is wrong. You got the old text still. Pick and choose what the good stuff was in those things,
Yeah.
and see what we got going here. I mean, brilliantly said there. We're coming back to this analogy of me sitting in the classroom there between these two uh, uh,
Mm.
uh, 8 by 11, 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper on the wall that really stuck with me all these years. And in that same classroom, well, the professor that I had for the class that taught within that classroom, unrelated to the two things that were on the wall, um, knew that I was a Star Wars fan because the class was about heroes and villains. And
Mm.
a year later was when the first trailer for The Last Jedi dropped. And
Mm.
of course, all our listeners probably know that was the one that famously ended with Luke Skywalker saying at the end, "It's time for the Jedi to end." And
Mm.
literally, maybe 5 hours later, I got an email from that professor. I'd long graduated by this point, but she somehow still reached out to me with this whole think piece article that was like, "I think you'll be into this one." And
Yeah.
based off of that line, where it's basically saying like, yeah, we should have questioned that perhaps a religious cult be the police of this large galaxy where they're understaffed by a large degree and kind of pick and choose where they go based on the will of this group of people there. It's like it all raises a lot of questions about what the society is in the galaxy at large. And it's like, yeah, we look nostalgic. We all come from that 1977 A New Hope, Obi-Wan looking nostalgically back on a past time when the Guardians, raising up the Jedi in this great light in a way to sway Luke Skywalker to
Mm.
become the new hope for the galaxy that he believes he can be. Where in reality, both can exist, right? There can be the nostalgic feelings for the past and good things that the Jedi did do, but there also is the hypocrisy of it all and the weirdness of, wow, we should have really thought about having and the Acolyte is getting to that, right? They're having an independent
Yeah.
review that's going to be analyzing what the Jedi are doing. They're hiding up things. People are going off on secret missions without the authority of the High Council. Even their whole dogma is not even being followed to a strict degree, and that's what happens when you build yourself up to almost an
Mm.
empire in a way, and then it
Yeah.
allows the rule of two Sith to kind of scathe by and sit across from me at a table for all these years, and that leads us on a path to, well, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil, right? It's just
Yeah.
setting us on this deep dark path that is eventually going to happen, and it's sad seeing the next 100 years going to be playing out, knowing that this is the end point that they're getting at. But again, like you said, hopefully a strong Rey Skywalker will
Mm.
take the good and the bad from the past and make a better future. That's all we can ever hope for posterity, is that they will do things better than what we did. And she is a great blank slate to go off of here. So that's where I kind of lie on that one. But I put you through the ringer with all these questions here, my friend.
Yeah, well, and you just said it something really smart, and it made me think of something very dumb that's circulating on the internet today. There's a meme going around of Admiral Mahdi
Mhm.
in the original Death Star conference room scene, and I'm gonna get the exact text wrong, but it's a tweet, and it started as a tweet, and it says like, "Shout out to this original G who made his co-worker stop talking about his weird space religion at a work meeting."
That's right.
And that's what you're talking about, right? I mean,
That's
it's
exactly
like,
right.
yeah, it is weird that you let this one guy just talk about the Force and convert them all. We wouldn't let that happen in the
We
workplace.
would not. We would not.
But
We'd say like,
yeah.
"Whoa, whoa, whoa, slow your horses there."
Nicely done, though. That was very well said, and I do think it is. I am in a hopeful place about the galaxy and where we're going in different places. As we record, I've just started reading. There's a new book by Dr. Chris Kempshell.
Yeah.
It's an in-universe history called "The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire," and it's picking up on a lot of those themes. I'm only like 50 pages in, but it's really fun because he really leans into the game of, I'm a historian writing like an academic historian, but
Mhm.
inside the Star Wars universe. And
Beautiful.
it's really fun. And he's got like footnotes to fake archives and totally like just hitting my heart in all the right places for that. So I think if people love this kind of thinking about those politics and the way these structures work, I think that's a great choice right now. If you're not going for Light of the Jedi to
Yes,
give this a try.
exactly. The historian in me loves that stuff. So, like, give
Yeah,
it to me.
it's great.
Give it to me. Well, Greg, we've talked at length about this episode. I think that this may be the longest episode of our podcast that we've done so far, as I
Oof.
surmised. So you've been very gracious with
Mhm.
your time. If you have any final thoughts on the episode, feel free to air them now, and also tell the folks where they can find you on the interwebs and your various podcasts if they want to keep hearing the stuff that you're doing there, which is fantastic, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you for the invitation and the compliments. I really, it was a fantastic conversation. You know, I think those of us who I don't think we had to withstand the show. We had to withstand the reactions to
Yes,
the
the
show
journey
and
to
the
get
kind of
here.
culture. Yeah, the journey. And I do think it's really paying off for everybody who gave it a little bit of patience
Hmm.
and everybody who let the storyteller tell the story that
Yes.
she wanted to tell. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I will have good faith discussions about strengths and weaknesses all day long, and so I think you know, well, I'll turn this into my plug. So I very infrequently write a bit on my blog, which is at EyeOnCanon.com. So that's EyeOnCanon. And I did one last fall as High Republic Phase 3
Hmm.
started about what live action Star Wars should learn from the High Republic,
Ooh.
which is not like groundbreaking, but was a fun thought exercise because we were in this kind of lull in Star Wars live action,
Hmm.
and the High Republic has been such a vibrant part of my fandom. And one of my 5 things on the list was trust your creators, because I think we've seen these directors get put through the ringer and then they get their movie taken away, or and all of that. I think when you get a strong group of people who are creative and have a strong vision, you should let them execute it. And to me, whatever this last episode holds, this will be a strong vision from Leslie Headland that she got to execute, and I really like it. And Lucasfilm needs to be more bold and not be
Yes.
afraid of a few YouTubers who have undue influence, and just stick with it. So, other than that, I'll be talking about this and all other Star Wars shows on the Rebel base card theme. I will only shout out my other podcast because I know listeners to this show have heard your love of many, many movies such as Rebel Dawn and Indiana Jones, like I mentioned last. Sorry, I got the name right. Rebel
Rebel
Moon.
Moon.
Rebel
Yes.
Moon. I When you said in a recent episode that he's changing the titles again for the subtitles for the director's cut, my mind just melted. I'm like, I can't remember these ones
I
now.
know.
So
I know. That's
apologies, but
okay.
with due respect, So I co-host a podcast called The Long Take Review, which reviews movies. We do mostly awards season coverage, but we do blockbusters. Earlier today, we recorded about this long about Deadpool and Wolverine up until now, to
Okay.
prepare
Okay. I was
for
gonna say,
the
did
new
you
movie.
see the movie
So
beforehand?
no, I haven't seen the movie, but we boy, there are a lot of Wolverine movies.
Yes.
I'd forgotten how many
Oh yeah.
times Hugh Jackman has put on the claws. So that's a great episode, and brings a lot of the same kind of fun spirit that I hear on Force Ghost all the time, and embraces it. I do not know if I can commit to the Rebel Moon director's cuts, but I did not regret watching the first two,
Yeah.
or the first there. And you shouted out novelizations earlier. I love that those got novelizations,
Yes.
because that's kind of this lost art. And this exactly speaks to the point you made,
100%
which is
agree.
I I today bought the Ahsoka comic adaptation, and I'm flipping through. I'm
Yeah.
like, this is just the show. This is exactly the show. And then I was like, what did I think it would be? But a novelization instead that can
Gotta get in the
expand and
head.
adjust and do it. It's a great art form, and I'm glad somebody's still doing it. So
Absolutely. And they're
yes.
based off of the director's cut. So for like getting those little bits
Mm.
of details that weren't in the PG-13 cut, they'll be
Mm.
in the and hopefully I don't know, to be honest. Maybe they won't be. Maybe they will be. Who knows? We'll have to find out on August 2nd those come out. And you know,
Nice.
not for everybody, but again, if you like those first two, perhaps I've heard that they're not the same movie. Like it's not just like
Yeah.
the 2 hour PG-13 with like an extra hour that's rated R stuff. Like conversations are different in the
Hmm.
director's cut from what I've heard. So like they're maybe different movies in general, like alternate versions in a way. So there may be like two competing visions. I don't know. It's wild. I'm here for it. It's space punk, Seven Samurai, out in the vast wilderness of space. Who knows what's going on? It's fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if listeners have not watched Seven Samurai, I have not watched Rashomon. These are the source. These are the movies
Yes,
for
they
you.
inspire a lot of people. So if you want to
Yeah.
see the movies that inspired other people, go check those out. There's a ton of
Yeah.
westerns and Japanese samurai films that are continuing to do that to this day. And if you haven't already, go check out Godzilla Minus One, because that's going to inspire a lot of
Mm,
filmmakers for the next 50 years. I can already tell you, folks. All right, Greg,
yeah.
thanks again for hopping on the show here and for chatting all things. What is this episode even called now? It's called Choice. We've been on this for
Joyce.
episode for a while. I forgot what it was titled, and it was a really great episode. I'm glad that we had the chance to really break it down there and get into the nitty gritty of the themes and all that stuff. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights and views on this episode, and with all these really ridiculously hard questions that I threw your way. So you knocked them all out of the park, and we'll certainly have you back on whenever we can get our schedules coordinated, because this was a blast. And for the folks at home, thank you so much again for listening. We've got one more episode in the Acolyte next week. So get ready for that. And then we'll, of course, be back to discuss it all on Sunday with a brand new episode in your podcast feeds. And until then, may the force be with you. Take care.